Well, hey folks, blah blah blah. Kind of did a little afterthought video, so you get a third bonus video today. It's one of those days. Because I'm going through and putting a little thought into what I want to say about the various classes in D&D for the three videos I'm going to do about the classic core rulebook D&D classes for 5th edition. I noticed that really, when you think about it, there's four divine classes roughly, and really only one of them really functions entirely properly as what like your average player and even DM seems to kind of feel like they're supposed to function as. The way these types of characters are depicted often in novels and fiction doesn't necessarily line up to exactly what D&D is doing with them. And specifically, I'm talking about your clerics and your monks and druids. Really only paladins in the classic depiction of paladin. One can argue that the 5th edition, by making them more oath-based, pushes them more into a martial class as a divine class. But even to this day, though, people still seem to like write for them as if they're a divine class, and that's always been more like the classic thing. You're a holy knight who's adhering so pure and true to your God's holy path that you're being graced with some amount of like divine providence, kind of a thing. You're cut above just your average knight. A knight is someone who takes an oath, kind of a thing. So, to some organization or to themselves and all that kind of stuff. The clerics, people, really want to play them as priests. They're depicted in fiction as priests. As much as as much as Goblin Slayer is like a great kind of a depiction of like what D&D could be under idealized, perfect circumstances. I do notice that the young girl cleric that travels around with Goblin Slayer. Sorry, I can't remember her name. It's been like a year since the last time I watched that. Like, she's not really that, in some ways, yes, she's a good depiction of a cleric, especially a first level cleric, but, she's just not kick-ass enough. Clerics are not just pure priests who do nothing but lay on hands. They are a form of warrior. They're a holy warrior. They're defenders of the faith. They are limited in the types of weapons they use because of a vow they've taken not to use blades and that kind of stuff. And they're more defensive in posture. They're not a skirmisher like a fighter or a ranger, or they're not suited really for cavalry tactics and all that kind of stuff. They're almost more like holy guards. Defenders of artifacts, high priests, locations. Being sent out on specific missions to deal with direct threats to their cult or church or whatever it is you're calling it in your setting. But a lot of players and a lot of DMs I've just noticed observationally over the years, and also, as I say, through a lot of the fiction, that a lot of this stuff is based upon or has even been derived from these role-playing games. Like, clerics are just kind of treated as just like more your soft priest character that doesn't ever do any fighting and isn't good at fighting, and they're mainly just there to kind of hang in the back until someone's been hurt, and then they come in and do the heal on hands thing. And really though, the actual write-up for clerics, going back to the beginning, and even to a large degree, even the modern version, they're a very combat suitable character. More so than people seem to give them credit for. I guess a lot of it is determined by how you choose to place your attributes and all that kind of stuff. But in many ways, druids are actually the better priest class. But as I've already discussed in my druid video, how much they actually, the 5th edition or the modern fantasy version of druid period actually really matches up to what druids really were is very, there's a few things that are that all works, but there's like a bunch of like other layers in terms of the magic they use and the whole like channeling the spirit of Gaia kind of vibe a lot of them give out. Shape shifting, like why do they all have to be able to turn into fucking otters? Like why is that innate? They're supposed to be politicians who conduct ceremonies for civic purposes. That's what they were. They weren't even nobles or anything like that. They were kind of pseudo priestly, And because of that, though, even with all the weird additions of the weird magic and stuff, they still actually function better as priests type characters than a D&D setting than clerics actually do when you're actually looking at, like, you know, their capabilities of what kind of, you know, like training and stuff they seem to have. They derive their magic a little differently, and because of D&D's right up there, they don't emphasize the gods as well, and so, you know, they're kind of dysfunctional in that way. Monks are not entirely dysfunctional. The problem is that there's two very different kind of depictions of monks in fantasy and in history, and the monks that we get in D&D are your, you know, Chinese, East Asian influenced Shaolin monk kind of vibe, and that's largely there because at the time that all this stuff was being introduced into D&D in the first place, there was that little explosion of popularity in kung fu movies and samurai movies over here in the United States, thanks in large part to the popularization of Bruce Lee and Akira Kurosawa films and all that kind of stuff that happened in like the late 60s and throughout the 70s and leading on to modern times. I mean, Karate Kid, Ninja Turtles, there's been like an ongoing, you know, kind of commercial enterprise of sorts to get, you know, Americans into martial arts. And so having a martial arts mystic character fits into D&D, but because they're called monks, that does kind of give them a, you know, a religious order overtone. And because in the West, monks were specifically a type of, clergyman, you know, hermetic, you know, they, you know, live apart from, you know, other people. A lot of them take vows of silence and all that other kind of stuff. But, you know, they should be very book learned type characters, more like scribes. If I were to like designing D&D from scratch and I were going to be including a monk in it, and my intention was to frame most of it as medieval European kind of stereotypes, which D&D mostly is, then my monks, I would probably treat them as a type of divine class, but instead of knowing martial arts, they would like have some sort of light ability to learn wizard spells, although like not to the same degree as a full-time wizard. And then they would also have some of the basic most of your priestly kind of abilities. But that's just how I would do it. And so, yeah, like I said, up till the point that they introduced the whole thing about they get their powers from taking oaths, paladins fit their historical template probably the best. And even with the oath thing, like I said, it kind of seems that most people kind of ignore that anyway and still treat them as if they're swearing that oath to Bahamut or one of the gods. You know, you can still play with that. Giving them a bit more free range in their alignment. Well, it's all just kind of part of the greater debate about alignment, which has been going on pretty much since the beginning, as far as I can tell. Anyway, so not necessarily going to get into that here, but yeah, like they all kind of don't really quite fit their stereotype. The thing with only having the martial arts version of monks is like that doesn't necessarily fit in properly with how do you square that with, you know, a world that also has paladins and druids. You know, they're you know, like culturally in the world they you know, were like separate threads of human civilization for quite some time that knew about each other a little bit at the edges, but it's not like there was like, you know, a 2-hour flight and you're there kind of a world back then. So you know, they're separated just enough to develop their own unique flavors, and by bringing this one thing out of one and putting it in the other, at times it seems like kind of a misfit. You know, you have a medieval Spanish kind of setting or something like that, or you're going for like some sort of a Charlemagne-esque Huguenot France, or, you know, any number of things. You know, and you have your church-like priest order that has its clerics that are, you know, defenders of the faith. It has its paladins who are kind of serving like crusading knights. You know, with some work, you put druids in place of priests, or they can be like some sort of renegade pagan order that's kind of taboo and looked down upon by the church, and, you know, to try to stamp them out. I mean, depending on how much you want to like delve into how realistic religious conflict in the past has been. You know, it's up to you how much you want to dial up that kind of stuff. But and then you go out to the monastery, you know, because there's a bunch of scrolls and stuff, and you're told like you need to get something, you know, scribbled by a scribe, and then everyone there is practicing martial arts. I don't know. It just at times it seems a bit weird. Now, the title of this video is Palladium Fantasies, Divine Classes Are Better, and that's because they're mostly framed as what you're looking for. Paladins and Knights are actually rather similar, and Paladins don't have any divine investment of ability. They have just priests, which is what players like want to be playing, and they're not priests who also are really, really great at bashing people to death with a mace. And you know how to use shields and armor and all that kind of stuff. They're just dudes who, you know, are highly educated and can lay on hands. They do have the martial artist monk, but in one of their source books for I want to say it's the one for the old ones, they also present a purely monastic monk as a player character. Their druids are attempt to do closer to what I'm talking about in terms of them being kind of like a wise man, elder council, social seasonal holiday kind of priest, as opposed to like just, you know, some weirdo shape-shifting magician who hangs out in the woods all the time. So they got that going for them. And yeah, their character classes in general that are of a divine flavor seem to do a better job at actually being the concept that most people kind of already have in mind when they're doing these things, and therefore you're not trying to transplant your own mental template on top of something that doesn't quite fit. In D&D, the only write-up for just a regular priest is entirely presented as an NPC template at the end of the monster manual. But that's not really what any of the players' options are, without doing a little, you know, tweaking and homebrew re-ruling and, you know, other things that can annoy people or, you know, can start to destabilize all those sorts of stuff because the way D&D is balanced in particular, if you can call it ever really balanced in the get-go, because of the fact they do combine some of the weird stuff they combine. Well, anyway, though, like I said, this is just kind of like an afterthought to my last video that, you know, wouldn't really quite fit in necessarily with those subject matters. So, like, look forward tomorrow. I'll probably do civilized, or yeah, I'll probably do the civilized classes tomorrow. We'll see. I might change my mind. Until then, leave comments, hit like and subscribe, and as always, stay well-spinated!